and again, because I know you, some of the things you've explored that I thought was super interesting was the approach of bringing alive the buckler and single sword, you know, the approach of exploring what happens when two different rapier schools meet. Because I think something that is a challenge for us creating fights is when everyone looks like they went to the same fight director or fight master, right? And so what I like is clearly, and I think that's one of the reasons why I do what you suggested, why I build with people, is it's very unlikely if you and I build together, we'll move the same. So I find that the fights look like different people. It's funny though, when we're watching fights, you'll lean over and go, that's you. Right? And we can start seeing each other's styles, which I think is quite neat. And in case anyone's interested in seeing Todd's fights, there's many of them that you can see on the Rapier Wit channel that this is going to be on. And I would really urge you to, because I think you'll be very impressed with what Todd has created with some very talented artists in performance.
I would like to say though, you know, my interest in historical martial arts is not simply to kind of resurrect an old, you know, I'm not doing it as a museum exhibition. I do it because I find that it helps me solidify actions with the actor, because fencing, specifically, and historical fencing, is really written in the language of the actor. It's all about intentions. So when I execute a particular move, I might have the primary intention, a secondary intention depending on how you react, or a tertiary intention depending on if you react in a different way. So in each time, I'm waiting for you to, when I send my attack forward, I'm expecting a particular response. And if I get that response, it tells me how I'm going to finish that action. And so that's how I've started talking to my students now about their fight, is trying to build it with martial intent. Because I find that a lot of fights that we used to do, this doesn't happen as much with us anymore, but a lot of fights you would see like 20 years ago in the stage combat community were often built on
tricks and flash?
Tricks and flash, or the movement is there simply to allow me to emote. Right? So,
yeah.
You know, like we would look at the actions within the sword fight, and you'd hear directors talking about, you know, he needs to be angrier, he needs to be, you know, he needs to be rage-filled, or she should scream. And if you talk that way about a scene, someone would accuse you of just playing emotion,
right,
as opposed to playing intent. And so when you
that's my brother. I'll talk to him later because you're that important, Todd.
Right. Because when you play a fight for intent, then each of your actions has a very specific purpose, as opposed to you just screaming and moving as fast as you can, which is what fights for a lot of stage combat was for the longest time.
For sure.
And so now that I talk in these terms, it gives the actor a very specific thing that they're trying to do in each moment. And it doesn't mean that there's no emotion connected to it, but the emotion comes out of your either success or your failure with that intention, the way it would in a normal scene.
Brilliant.
Right?
Brilliant. That's fantastic. I think one of the things I like is starting technically proficient for the character and letting emotion get them in trouble.
Well, and that was a whole
which happens, right?
Yeah, and that's a whole tactic historically, is to try and get someone out of their humor. So if you know someone is cool and collected, if you can get them angry, then they're going to screw up.
Right. Right. Brilliant. 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 Since we're going in talking about this, and I love the fact that you're saying that it's in the language of acting. Is there a particular fight master that you feel speaks historical fight master that speaks the way actors think more than others? Because Silver comes to mind, you know what I mean? Insofar as Silver has this sort of, this is what you got to do to get what you want. And it has a bit of that old concept of the method school, do you know what I mean? Immerse and go, right? That kind of,
right.
You know? And so and obviously they all have their own charm, right? Because you yourself, you've looked at the evolution of rapier, and it goes from lots and lots of different numbers to fewer numbers, and you know, and obviously there's some that you're finding more useful to express in the short time we have to teach to get where you're going. But is there one that just comes to mind? You go, it's amazing, and I bet you he worked in theater.
I don't know. I mean, I think the problem with that question is that whenever I look at a manuscript, I'm always funneling through the head of an actor, right? Like I'm always looking at it in that case. So I'm not sure that there's one that speaks to me more than another. Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah, I don't
fair.
know.
That's fair. Is there something I haven't brought up that you feel like, oh, we got to talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm very passionate about in terms of the way we approach our art is that we do not succumb to dogma. And that has been a problem. And you see this with a lot of organizations, generally larger organizations than us, in that, you know, this is the only way you can do something.
Yeah.
And I think within the art, there's probably two rules that I'd say have to be followed at all times. You never thrust a weapon at someone's face, and you never strike someone on a joint.
I'm going to do a call out to a friend of ours who really has been instrumental in challenging me in some of my thoughts that I got comfortable with, Louisa. So Louisa's a dear friend of ours, and I'm hoping to have her in a future interview. And it's not like, it sounds like I'm saying that she came in and really aggressively, but she would just ask me a question, and when you have to really think about your answer, do you know what I mean? So there are times where I can comfortably give an answer, and it still sits well. Do you know what I mean? I do X because of Y. When the answer is because I was taught that way, makes me want to totally take it apart and really examine it. And think about all the stuff that you first took as, well, dogma, right, gospel, that simply isn't part of your training and teaching anymore. And I don't even mean industry standard things like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for instance, in the beginning, when I first started, there were boy fights and girl fights, which is like ridiculous, you know? Or you needed to, I've met some people who you needed enough force that there was slightly a reality to the reaction versus an acted reaction. So you had to hit hard enough to alter the human versus the character. Right. So I'm just curious, let me throw that back at you. Are there some things that you look back and go, wow, it's really interesting, I used to teach that, and it's just not part of your lexicon anymore?
Yeah, back in the day I used to, and I think we all did, we used to all teach some offline thrusting. That's something that I don't do anymore, and that's a big dogma issue, right? Like that, there's a lot of people who come to us and they've been taught you never, ever, 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 ever thrust directly at the body.
That's an excellent one.
And the way we approach it, though, I think is significantly safer, because we've heard a lot of horror stories of people who thrust offline, who, in thinking that it's super safe, throw more force into it than they should, and end up tagging someone in a very strong way. Whereas we use concepts of true time to make sure that we always know where that tip is in space, so we're never going to hurl our body. So for people who don't understand true time comes from an English fencing master named George Silver, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare's. And the concept is very simple. Whenever you execute an attack, you must do it in the following order. The hand moves before the body moves before the foot or feet. So if I'm going to thrust, I extend my arm, I move my body, I move my feet last. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the hand has to be the first thing that moves. It just means it has to be in front of the body. So when I'm doing it with a cut, if I needed to, I could redirect that cut into a parry, as opposed to having it up behind my head while I move my body forward, creating a target. Now, that's the martial reason why you want to do it. The stage combat reason why you want to do it is because when I execute my attack, you can see where my point is in space. So I point at you, I extend my arm, and now you have a good indication of how far you need to get out of the way so that I can then complete my movement forward. And when my arm is an extension, if you don't move forward, let's say I do start moving forward before you do, and I see that my tip is encroaching on you, I can always retract my arm to gain space. So it gives me a valve there. With false time, which is where you screw that order up, and the way a lot of stage combat had been performed for years, is you jump forward with your foot and then you punch your arm forward at the last second. And the problem with that is when your arm's punching forward, you've got a split second to decide whether or not you're too close. And if you mess that up, you've hit somebody.
Yeah.
Right? And even if you're offline, you might not hit them with your tip, but you might get in close enough to bang them with your hilt. It might screw up the angle of the parry, or what we often see is it just doesn't look good, right? And that's the other reason why it's good for us to do. Because if I'm attacking you by pointing at your body and moving forward and then we go, it looks like the attack is coming in. Whereas if I'm off like this, and then I jump forward, it looks like it would never hit you, right? Because I'm clearly offline.
I'm really happy you
brought that up.
Yeah.
Was that it's supposed to be just a few inches. Like you're just supposed to go that far offline, but that's never how it was practiced. It was always a foot, 2 feet offline. Yeah. And as you get closer and closer, because it's harder to tell your distance, your blade is all the way up here. Now, I know that's a controversial thing to say for some people, and I'm sure there are people who do offline thrusting who have found a way to make it work very well. So I'm not saying that we should never do it. I'm just saying that I've rarely seen it work well aesthetically, and I question it safety-wise. So that's something I never use anymore. I rarely talk about fight speeds anymore.
Yeah, please go into that, because I distinctly remember the first time you'd thought about this for a long time, but the first time you sort of had it in a sound bite. Do you know what I mean? So this is great. I thought that I thought you expressed this really well. So please.
So one of the main rules of stage combat, or one of the main principles of it, is working slowly up to speed. And we do that by starting at what we say is 25% speed, or some people call it Tai Chi speed or slow motion speed. And this is where you're slowly learning and training your body with the movement. And then when you and your partner get comfortable with that, then you move up to half speed. So like about double that pace. And then you move up to 75% speed. And then there's a few different versions of it. Either you stay at 75% speed so that when you get on stage and you get that burst of adrenaline, that will kick you to your 100%, or you rehearse to your 100% speed and then try to maintain that as your run goes on. Now, I hate that idea of getting the burst of adrenaline and going to 100%, because that means that you're experiencing something for the first time in front of an audience. And if something goes wrong, you're stuck, right?
Yeah.
Like that seems wildly dangerous to me. The reasons why I don't use these terms anymore, with the exception of maybe 25% or Tai Chi speed, is because they're meaningless. Like Tai Chi speed makes a lot of sense. We have all seen people practice Tai Chi. We've all seen things in slow motion. We've all seen the 300. We understand what that means physically. But what does 50% mean? Like, what does 75% mean? It's meaningless. And there's a joke amongst a lot of us with some of our members who like to go really fast. That
we're not going to name any names. Name names.
Okay, it's Simon and Kevin. And sometimes me and Mike, and there's a bunch of us
yes.
who, will go faster than, because our concept of what 50% speed is off. And often, speed feels good, right? It feels great to go that way. But it's not great to go there too early, because you need your body to understand what you're doing and be able to replicate it in slow motion perfectly over and over and over again. Now, the reason why I don't use those anymore is because I'm now teaching intention. And often my intention is based upon the tempo of someone's action or my action. So in rapier, let's say I come in and I make an engagement. and this person is going to come and try and re-engage on the other side and attack me. So my response to that is, as they come underneath my blade, I'm going to do my own counter circle so that I can reconnect and close that line. And to do that, it requires that I wait for their point to be just underneath my blade, and then I make a smaller, tighter circle than they do. And so for it to work, it has to work in a particular tempo. So the intention is going to dictate the speed. Now, we can work on that slowly, but once you start to feel it, you'll feel the speed right away. It's not that you have to, it's not like we're jumping from 25% to 100%, if we want to use those terms, but it's linked to the intention. So it's easier for the actor to understand what they're trying to do, and they have specific physical cues to guide them. Whereas when let's say we're doing the same fight and we're like, okay, we've mastered this at slow motion, let's go to 50%. Now we're both trying to judge what 50% is for us. And oftentimes the timing gets, a little screwy and things fall apart. And then it becomes, and we see this often with actors, is two actors, instead of having a dialogue, they have two monologues that they're trying to time together so that
Absolutely.
they fit. And it often never does, right? And that's where mistakes happen. And I find the more I've talked to people about intention and linking tempo to intention, it's easier for them to find it and to maintain it. So it's less likely that you get those, our timing was off, right?
But I have to ask, if you don't mind,
Mhm.
devil's advocate. So,
Sure.
because I know we've been in the room where you're watching a rehearsed version of the performance, or they're moving towards final performances, and the actors have plateaued at a place that lacks an urgency that allows the audience to believe the violence. I'm being careful in my use of the words, because I could say the fight's too slow, right? Which may actually be the case, but I'm trying to use language that I know that you yourself use. I know you don't want to say just be faster. What is the tool you pull from the chest to help actors move from a lack of urgency and a plateaued energy to what you feel is performance energy?
It's to go back to the intention, right? So whenever I find that happens, it's generally that the actor doesn't understand what they're doing in that moment. And so for them, it's just a movement that they're trying to replicate. And they're maybe trying to just physically parrot what they think I'm trying to get them to do. So often what I will do is I will do the fight with them. And if they're going at a slower tempo that allows me to add an extra move in, I can say, look, right here, I could do something else.
Right.
And even though the audience isn't trained as a fighter, they're not trained in martial arts for the most part, they'll see that and they'll go, I don't understand why he didn't do something else there, or why she didn't, do an extra action which would allow them to win. So usually I go back to the intention and work it from that angle. Because then again, it's more connected to the actor and what they're trying to do as a character, as opposed to us trying to impose speed as a concept. Now, that's something that I would do with our performers who are trained through our system. That's not to say that I don't use speeds when I'm working in theater with people who have very little training, because it can still be a very good tool when you're working with performers who don't have any training and you don't really have time. So, but it's not my preferred method. It's something that I will use if I absolutely have to, because I just don't have the time.
That you can pull when needed, but it's not your go-to.
So it's like all of the things from classic stage combat or 20th century stage combat, let's say, industry standard. They're all useful tools, and they can be used when needed. So we shouldn't throw them away, but I think there are better ways of doing things.
Fantastic. Well, I got to tell you, we're going to do this again.
Yeah.
This has been such an absolute pleasure, and there's so many more things I want to ask, but I wanted to keep these in digestible amounts of time. So that's why, and also it's very sneaky on my part to be able to call you back and do more. But one last thought from you, anything you just want to share?
Yeah. I just want to say that to anyone who's watching this, if you're watching this, you are probably a stage combat person, maybe a teacher, a fight director, or a practitioner. And all I would say is don't fall into the dogma trap. Don't because that's the way we've always done it. That's the way we always have to do it. And you know, listen to a lot of people, see what they have to do, and take from them what you think is going to be useful. And don't believe anybody. Don't believe me. I mean, go out and do your own research and find out what works for you. I've done that because I found there was too many things that I've been exposed to in my stage combat career that I was like, I don't know if I really like that, or that's not true. Like I remember my very first fight test, I failed. It was for the Society of American Fight Directors, and I was doing my basic actor combatants, which was rapier and dagger, unarmed, and broadsword. And one of the reasons why
was this in New York?
This was in New York.
Gotcha.
And one of the reasons why I failed is because my broadsword, the Fight Master said it was too slow and cumbersome, and that really you want the broadsword to flow and to move. And I had been told by my instructors in the course that broadswords, like the swords we were using were these steel swords that were probably like maybe 4.5 pounds. So too heavy for a long sword. A long sword really should be in the 2.5 to 3.5 pound range, somewhere in there. And so my teachers told me that a real broadsword was somewhere in the 8 to 20 pound range. And I was 160 pounds. I had pipe cleaner arms. I'm like, well, if this was a 20-pound sword, how would I use it? And so I incorporated that into my fight style, and that was one of the things that failed me. And so after that, I didn't believe anything anyone told me. I'm like, I'm going to go out and do some research and figure out if this is right. And I don't think it's not that my instructors were trying to lie to me on purpose. It's just that game of telephone that had happened. Like somewhere someone said, yeah, long sword's probably around 4 or 5 pounds, and that turned into 5 or 6 pounds, or 6 to 8 pounds, or 8 to 20 pounds, right? So
Leva used to talk about lies my fight director told me, or my fight master told me. Yeah.
I wrote a whole lecture series I had called "Lies My Fight Director Told Me." And again, it's not because of anyone's incompetence or deception. We just didn't have a lot of information back then. We have so much more information now. And there's so many videos. Like YouTube is a huge resource. If you're interested in historical martial arts, just go on YouTube. Watch tons and tons of videos of martial artists explaining the art form. And what's great about historical martial arts is that they're all dead arts for the most part. So there's a lot of interpretation that's happening. So there's constantly new innovation and new revelations happening about how these weapons might have been used. So it's fantastic. There's a wealth of knowledge, and you should really get out there and look into that.
What's interesting, Ben, you talked about the swords you used. When I started collecting and building my armory, the choices were really small. And that's why, and a shout out to a friend, Chris Warlow at Fantastic Creations. That's why so many of the weapons I have now were built to our needs, because they were so hard to acquire, either availability or just cost effective to put a room full of weapons out. And we're constantly moving towards lighter and lighter weapons, finding weapons that are, and you have a tremendous armory of aluminum weapons for that reason, that are excellent. So that's another thing I think that I'm going to ask you, where would you suggest for people to look to find weapons that are appropriate for use?
You could look with Rogue Steel out of Illinois. They're very good. They make really great, dependable stage combat weapons. They do both steel and aluminum. I'm a big fan of aluminum because I think, giving ourselves the extra weight is not necessary, really. What I'm more interested in is the feel and balance of the sword. And when you read a lot of these documents on how the swords were used, it's not necessarily that they were super light. Like a rapier really was one of the heavier single-handed swords. They tended to be in the 2.5 to 4 pound range, sometimes closer to 4 pounds. But balance-wise, they were balanced in such a way that the tip moved very quickly. And so we want something that moves like that. So I would, when you're looking at places to buy from, just make sure you get something that has a good balance point on it. Hopefully working with someone that if you're not happy with how it balances out, you can send it back for some alterations. I know there's a gentleman named Tom Fiocchi, who I think is also in Illinois maybe, who does some very beautiful work if you have some money to spend, and will do some alterations for you. There was a gentleman here named Charles Jevons who made most of my weapons, who is just fantastic. Charles's aluminum blades are by far the best I've ever handled. Unfortunately, he doesn't make any more. I think
there are, for people just starting out, you don't have to marry your first weapon, if that makes sense. And you can get inexpensive poly, like plastic or resin weapons to start up, because the importance, I think, in the beginning is to get moving and to get active. And I have some rubber weapons that are really poorly balanced, like they're not great.
Yeah.
But if that's all you can afford, you're a student, or all you can get is an épée blade, and you have it on a saber hilt, that's not a bad way to start. And I know it's not your preferred rapier or small sword for that matter, but boy, I'll tell you, when I started, that was our rapier, small sword, single sword. We used it for everything.
It's true. Although I would suggest, like, if you were thinking of getting a saber hilted épée, you might want to think about just putting a little bit more money into it and buying a small sword or a rapier from Rogue Steel. It's going to be more expensive, but in the long run, it's probably a better investment for you.
More
useful. If you're looking into some of the rubber or polypropylene weapons, I hear the Rollins rubber weapons are pretty good. Dave Rollins is associated with them. He's out of the UK. I would not buy the cold steel swords. A lot of their knives are really good, and some of their tomahawks, if you're interested in that, but their swords tend to be wildly imbalanced. So there are better, just do some research. There are some better polypropylene out there. Do some research on some HEMA, some historical European martial arts sites, and see where they're getting their stuff. And
if I may, I would say, and if you're lucky enough to have people around you who have gear, try some of their gear out and see what works for you, because I think nothing beats having it in hand. And as much as I totally agree with what you're saying about weight and balance, you're still an individual, meaning you were talking to, and what one person doesn't like, you might like a lot. Because I've had swords in my hand that didn't speak to me, and other people they love. So there is something to be said about individuality when it comes to weapon choice. So
what I would say, there's a quote from my my Fight Master from New York, Maestro Ramon Martinez, who I've worked with a couple of times. So he's not really my Fight Master, but I like him a lot. And he has a thing. He says, "Don't let your ego get in the way of your training." So if you're having trouble with a heavier sword, get a lighter sword. A lot of people will pick up a sword, especially a broadsword, right? And they're like, yeah, this has a great weight. It's huge. Yeah, I feel like He-Man when I'm holding this up. But you'll never be able to use it efficiently, right? So go lighter. Go lighter, go lighter, go lighter is my thing.
Excellent.
Okay.
Todd, thank you so much. I can't wait to see you again, because this isolation's been a challenge, and I miss you, and I miss you. But thank you so very much, and we will talk again. And if you have any suggestions, people who are viewing, questions that you want to ask Todd, let me know, and I'll be happy to put them in the list next time. Thanks all, and take care.
Thank you.